The morning at Winterbrook House began with a bitter frost that silvered every pane of glass and turned the breath of the stable boys into small clouds. Alara Goodwood rose before dawn, as she had done every day since her 12th year, when the world had narrowed to the servants' staircase and the cold stone corridors of a house that never felt like home. She dressed in a plain wool gown the color of dried heather, pinned her dark hair back with ruthless efficiency, and checked the ledger she had spent half the night correcting. Numbers did not lie. They did not disappear in the night or leave a child waiting at a gate that never opened. Numbers were a refuge, and Alara had learned to cling to them with the quiet tenacity of ivy on a north wall. The Duke of Ashworth employed 3 secretaries. The first was a gout-ridden gentleman who did nothing but sneeze and complain. The second was a smooth-faced young man named Mr. Barlow, who spent more time admiring his reflection in the silver tea tray than attending to correspondence. The third was Alara, officially a junior copyist, unofficially the only person in the household who understood the Duke's chaotic system of estate records. She did not love the work. She loved what it kept at bay, the silence of the village cottage where her mother lay ill, the weight of an old question that pressed against her ribs every time she saw a man with dark hair and a groundskeeper's gate walk past the gate. That morning, Alara carried a stack of correspondence to the Duke's office on the 2nd floor. The house was stirring. Maids hurried past with armfuls of linen. A footman polished the banister with a cloth that smelled of beeswax. Cook's voice echoed from the kitchen stairs, barking orders about the venison. Alara climbed the north staircase, her shoes soft on the worn stone. She knew every creak, every loose board. She had memorized the house's secrets because knowing them made her feel less like a guest and more like a ghost, invisible but present. The Duke's office door stood ajar. She paused. A delivery had arrived from London, a large wooden crate pried open, with straw spilling onto the carpet. 2 footmen grunted as they lifted a massive framed canvas from the crate and hung it on the far wall. Alara stepped inside to place the correspondence on the desk. She did not intend to look at the painting, but the light from the tall windows fell across the canvas, and the face in the portrait caught her eye. The ledger slipped from her fingers. It struck the floor with a flat, echoing slap. The sound brought the footman to a halt. A voice from the adjoining study, low, cold, and edged with impatience, cut through the silence. "What is that noise?" Alara did not answer. She could not. The portrait showed a man in the green coat of a groundskeeper, standing beside a stone wall that she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. It was the wall that bordered the kitchen garden, the wall where her father had lifted her onto his shoulders and pointed toward the orchard, the wall where she had last seen him, kneeling to tie a loose rose stem, promising to be back before supper. The man in the painting had her father's face, the same broad brow, the same gentle mouth, the same quiet strength in his eyes, but the eyes were older now, tired, and painted with such detail that Alara felt he was about to speak. The Duke of Ashworth stepped into the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black with a cravat tied with military precision. His face was carved from granite and inherited arrogance, a sharp jaw, a blade of a nose, and eyes that were the gray of a winter sea. He looked at the fallen ledger, then at Alara, then at the portrait. "Miss Goodwood," he said, and his voice held the calm of a man who had never been interrupted in his life. "Explain yourself." Alara opened her mouth. The words would not come. Her gaze stayed fixed on the portrait. The Duke followed her line of sight. A shadow passed over his face, so swift she might have imagined it, and then his jaw tightened. "You recognize him?" It was not a question. It was an accusation. Alara forced herself to breathe. "That is my father." The Duke's expression did not change, but his hand, resting on the doorframe, went white at the knuckles. "Your father," he repeated, as if testing the word for rot. "James Mallory," Alara said. "He was a groundskeeper here. He vanished when I was 12. The footmen had stopped moving. One of them looked at the floor. The other looked at the Duke, then quickly away. The Duke took a step into the room. The air seemed to thicken around him. His presence filled the space, pressed against the windows, muted every sound except the hard rhythm of Alara's pulse. "Leave us," he said to the footmen. They obeyed in a hurry, boots scuffing on the carpet. The door clicked shut. Alara stood her ground, though her knees had begun to quake. She had learned long ago that fear was a luxury she could not afford. Dignity was a fortress, and she would not surrender it, not even to a duke with winter in his eyes. The Duke crossed to the desk. He did not sit. He braced both hands on the polished wood and leaned forward, his gaze stripping away every pretense, every defense. "Tell me," he said, "what you think you know." Alara lifted her chin. "I know that my father worked on this estate and that he left without warning. I know that my mother received a note saying he had gone to sea and that she would be cared for. I know that no one in this house ever spoke his name again." Her voice shook, but she did not lower it. "And now I know that you have a portrait of him hanging in your office as if he were a curiosity to be stored away." The Duke's eyes flickered. Something crossed his face, pain, or the ghost of it, before it vanished behind a mask of stone. "Miss Goodwood," he said slowly, "you have been in this house for 7 years. You have worked under my roof, eaten at my table in the servants' hall, and never once did you think to tell me that your father was James Mallory." "I did not know it mattered," she replied. "I was a child. I was told he abandoned us. I believed it." Her voice dropped. "Until today." The Duke pushed back from the desk. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, his silhouette black against the pale morning light. "Your father did not abandon you," he said. The words hung in the air like frost. Alara felt the floor tilt. "Then where is he?" The Duke did not turn. His shoulders rose and fell with a breath that seemed to cost him something. "That is a question," he said, "that I cannot answer in this room." He turned then, and for a moment, just a flicker, Alara saw not the Duke of Ashworth but a man carrying a burden that had bent his spine long before she ever entered his house. "You will come to my private study tonight," he said, "after the household has retired." Alara blinked. "I am a servant, it would be improper." "Not as improper," the Duke said, "as asking questions in a hall where every whisper has ears." He stepped toward her, close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the tiredness beneath the arrogance. "Do not speak of this to anyone," he said. "Not your mother, not the servants, no one." Alara wanted to argue. She wanted to demand answers now in the daylight with the portrait as witness. But she saw something in the Duke's face. A warning, yes, but also a fear that mirrored her own. "I will come," she said quietly. She turned and left the office without being dismissed. Behind her, the Duke stood alone, staring at the portrait of a man who should have been anonymous, but whose face now threatened to unravel the careful threads of a secret that had been buried for 7 years. And in the corridor, Alara pressed her hand to the wall to keep from falling, because for the first time in 7 years, she had a name to speak into the dark. Her father had not abandoned her. Someone had taken him. And the Duke of Ashworth knew why. Part 2. The day passed in a haze of whispers and sidelong glances. Alara performed her duties with mechanical precision, copying letters, balancing columns, sorting receipts, but her mind remained in the Duke's office, fixed on the portrait and the man who had hung it there. She took her meals in the servants' hall, where the chatter of the kitchen maids felt distant and muffled, like voices heard through water. Mrs. Thistle, the head housekeeper, cast a long look in her direction when Alara left half her food untouched. But no one asked questions. That was the way of great houses. Curiosity was a fire that could warm or destroy, and most servants learned to stand far from the flame. By 9 o'clock, the family wing had gone quiet. The Duke dined alone in the formal dining room, a silent figure at the head of a table built for 20. Alara did not see him. She waited in the narrow room she shared with another maid, listening to the measured tread of the night footman as he checked the windows and snuffed the candles in the lower hall. At 10:30, she slipped out of bed, pulled a shawl over her nightdress, and padded barefoot down the servants' staircase. The stone was cold as a grave under her feet. The air smelled of extinguished candlewicks and old wood. The Duke's private study was a small room off the library, separated from the main office by a heavy oak door. A single lamp burned on the desk, casting long shadows across a map of the county. The Duke stood by the window, still in his evening clothes, though his cravat had been loosened and his coat discarded. In the dim light, he looked less like a master of the realm and more like a soldier awaiting a battle he did not want to fight. He did not turn when she entered, closed the door. Alara obeyed. The latch clicked with a sound like a breaking twig. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I came because I want the truth," Alara replied, "not because I trust you." The Duke turned. His gray eyes were red-rimmed, and in the lamplight she saw the raw edge of a man who had not slept in a long while. "Your father was a good man," he said, "the best I ever knew." Alara's throat tightened. "Then why is his portrait in your office? Why did he disappear? Why did my mother weep every night for 2 years until she ran out of tears?" The Duke gestured to a chair. "Please sit." "I would rather stand." He inclined his head, as if he had expected nothing less. Then he walked to the desk and picked up a folded letter, yellowed at the edges. "This was found among my father's papers after his death," the Duke said. "I did not know it existed until last spring. It changed everything I understood about my family." Alara stared at the letter. "What does it say?" "It is a confession," the Duke said quietly, "written by the 7th Duke of Ashworth, my father." He held it out. Alara did not take it. "A confession of what?" "Of destroying an innocent man," the Duke said. "Your father." The words struck her like a blow to the chest. She swayed, and for a moment the room blurred. When her vision cleared, the Duke had moved closer, one hand half extended as if to steady her, though he did not touch her. "Explain," she whispered. The Duke drew a long breath. "When I was a boy of 10, my father hosted a hunting party. There was an accident, a gun misfired. A young man was wounded, not seriously but enough to cause a scandal. The man who saved my life that day was your father. He was not a groundskeeper, Miss Goodwood. He was an estate manager, educated, trusted, and far too clever for my father's comfort." Alara frowned. "You said he saved your life." "I was riding near the ravine. The horse bolted. Your father pulled me from the saddle before the animal went over the edge." The Duke's voice dropped. "He was a hero. My father never forgave him for it." "That makes no sense," Alara said. "Why would a duke resent a man for saving his son?" "Because your father saw the truth," the Duke said. "The hunting accident was no accident. My father, in a drunken rage, had struck a servant with the butt of a rifle. The man's hand was shattered. Your father witnessed it and demanded my father take responsibility." Alara felt a cold wave rise in her chest. "The heirloom." The Duke's eyes widened. "You know of the heirloom?" "My mother used to speak of a silver rose, something precious that vanished from the house. She said the servants blamed a thief." Alara shook her head. "She never said it was my father." The Duke turned away. "The silver rose was the Ashworth betrothal heirloom. It disappeared that same week. My father accused James Mallory of stealing it and arranging the hunting accident as a cover for the theft." "But that is a lie," Alara said. "Yes," the Duke said, "it was a lie, and I have proof." He picked up a second document, a ledger, bound in cracked leather. He opened it to a page marked with a strip of black ribbon. "This is my father's private account book, the one he kept hidden from his stewards. It shows a payment to a London jeweler 2 months after the heirloom vanished, a payment for the dismantling of a silver rose and the sale of its stones." The Duke's hand trembled, just slightly, but enough for Alara to see. My father stole the heirloom to pay his gambling debts. He blamed your father to protect himself. Ilara staggered back. Her shoulder struck the doorframe and she welcomed the pain. It anchored her to the room, to the moment. "Where is my father now?" she asked, and her voice was not a question but a wound. The Duke faced her. His expression was stripped bare. No arrogance, no pride, only a grief so deep it seemed to hollow him out from within. "He fled," the Duke said. "After the accusation, he was given a choice: leave quietly and never return, or face transportation and ruin. He chose exile to protect you and your mother. He wrote to you both, but my father intercepted every letter. He left instructions that the letters be burned." The Duke closed his eyes. "I found the last batch in the attic 2 months ago, unopened, tied with black ribbon." Ilara's legs gave way. She sank onto the edge of the chair, her hands pressed flat over her mouth. A sound escaped her, a low, animal cry that she had not made since she was 12 years old and watching the gate for a father who never came home. The Duke crossed the room. He knelt before her, not as a peer, but as a man undone by the sins of his bloodline. "I will find him," the Duke said. "If he still lives, I will find him and bring him home. I swear it on my life." Ilara looked at him through a blur of tears. "Why should I believe you?" "Because you are the only person in this house who has ever looked at me as if I could be better than my father," the Duke said. "And because you are the daughter of the man who saved my life. I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." He reached out, and with a gentleness that seemed foreign to his hands, placed the yellowed letter in her lap. "Read it," he said. "Read it and know the truth." Ilara unfolded the letter. The handwriting was cramped and hasty, the ink blotted in places where a hand had pressed too hard. She read the words in a daze. "I, Lawrence Arthur Mallory, swear upon my immortal soul that I did not steal the Ashworth rose. I leave this confession in the hope that one day my daughter will know her father was no thief, but a man who loved her beyond all reason." The letter was signed in her father's own hand. Ilara pressed it to her chest and wept. The Duke remained kneeling. He did not speak. He did not offer empty comfort. He simply stayed there, a silent witness to the years of grief that had finally found a voice. And in the corridor outside, pressed against the wall with her hand over her mouth, Miss Prudence Hale listened to every word, her eyes wide, her mind already spinning the threads of ruin. Part 3. The scandal began with a whisper in the servants' hall. By midday, the whisper had become a rumor. By evening, it had reached the outer edges of the village. Ilara Goodwood, the quiet copyist, had been seen leaving the Duke's private study at midnight, barefoot and wrapped in a shawl. The rumor curdled into something darker. She had gone to his room. She had thrown herself at him. She was a maid's daughter trying to climb into a ducal bed. Ilara heard the whispers in fragments, a phrase caught in the corridor, a silence that fell when she entered the kitchen. She said nothing. She kept her dignity close, like a cloak drawn tight against a bitter wind. But the portrait remained in the Duke's office, and the portrait was a wound that would not close. She wrote to her mother that evening. The letter was careful, guarded. "Do you remember the name James Mallory? I have heard it spoken here in the house. Why did you never tell me more?" She did not mention the Duke's confession. She did not mention the letters burned in the attic. She folded the page and sealed it with wax, then gave it to the post boy with a coin and a whispered instruction to deliver it quickly. The Duke, meanwhile, had become a ghost. He appeared at meals but did not speak. He locked himself in his study for hours, emerging with red-rimmed eyes and the scent of old paper on his sleeves. He did not summon Ilara. He did not acknowledge her presence. But she felt his gaze across the dining hall, across the courtyard, across the rows of ledgers in the office, a heavy, watchful weight that never quite settled. Miss Prudence Hale, the second secretary, watched it all with a smile like a paper cut. Prudence was a woman of 26, handsome in a brittle way, with pale eyes and a mouth that knew how to shape kindness without meaning it. She had hoped to become the Duke's confidant, perhaps his mistress. and she saw Ilara as a threat to a plan she had not yet fully formed. One afternoon, as Ilara sorted a pile of estate reports, Prudence leaned close and said, "The Duke has been most attentive to you lately, Miss Goodwood. Should I offer congratulations?" Ilara did not look up. "I do not know what you mean." "Of course you do," Prudence purred. "A man does not summon a woman to his study at midnight unless he wants something from her, and a woman does not go unless she is willing to give it." Ilara set down her pen. She turned to face Prudence with a calm that surprised even herself. "I went to the Duke's study because he asked me to," Ilara said. "The matter was private. It concerned my family. If you heard otherwise, then you heard a lie." Prudence's smile sharpened. A maid's daughter with a missing father and a duke who collects portraits of dead men. How very romantic. Ilara's hand trembled at her side, but she did not raise it. She would not give Prudence the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I have work to do," Ilara said and turned away. But Prudence had already done her damage. By the end of the week, the rumor had reached the ears of Lady Cecilia Vane, the widowed daughter of an earl, who had been circling the Duke for 2 seasons like a hawk eyeing a rabbit. Lady Cecilia did not like competition, and she liked even less the idea that a servant's daughter might have access to the Duke's private hours. She arrived at Winterbrook House on a gray afternoon, uninvited and unmistakable, dressed in a gown of mulberry silk with a hat that resembled a ship in full sail. The butler announced her as if she were already the mistress of the house. The Duke received her in the drawing-room. Ilara, carrying a fresh inkwell to the office, heard Lady Cecilia's voice through the open door. "I have heard the most extraordinary tale, Your Grace," Lady Cecilia said. "They say you have taken a fancy to a girl from the servants' quarters, a girl whose father was a common laborer and whose mother is a chambermaid. Surely you do not intend to make Winterbrook a laughing-stock." The Duke's response was low and cold. "I do not answer to gossip, Lady Cecilia." "No, but you answer to your name," the widow replied. "And your name is being dragged through every drawing-room between here and London. A maid's daughter, Ashworth. A girl who scrubs floors. What would your father say?" There was a pause. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She should have walked away. She should not have listened. But her feet would not move. "My father," the Duke said slowly, "is dead, and his opinions died with him." Lady Cecilia laughed, a brittle, silvery sound. "Then perhaps you should consider the opinions of the living. Marry well and your little indiscretion will be forgotten. Marry badly and you will be ruined, and her along with you." The door opened. The Duke stood there, his face white with fury. He saw Ilara in the corridor, inkwell clutched in her hands, and something in his expression softened, just for a moment before hardening again. "Miss Goodwood," he said, "you are not required here." "I was bringing ink," she said quietly. "Then bring it to the office and return to your duties." She did not move. She held his gaze, and in that small, charged silence, she saw the truth of his struggle, the pull between duty and decency, between the weight of a title and the memory of a man who had saved his life. Lady Cecilia appeared behind him, her smile widening at the sight of Ilara. "The maid's daughter," she said, as if nomming a species of insect. "How quaint." Ilara did not flinch. She curtsied, not prettily, but with a dignity that made the gesture feel like a rebuke, and said, "My lady." Then she turned and walked away, her back straight, her footsteps steady on the polished floor. That night, alone in her room, Ilara did not weep. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and stared at the letter from her father, the one the Duke had given her. She had read it 20 times. Each reading carved a little more grief from the wound, but it also carved something else, a resolve hard as flint. She would not be a scandal. She would not be a weapon for Lady Cecilia to wield. She would find the truth of her father's disappearance, with or without the Duke's help. And if the Duke could not stand beside her, then she would stand alone. But even as she thought it, A small, stubborn voice whispered that the Duke had knelt at her feet, that he had promised to find her father, that his eyes, gray and weary, had held a grief that matched her own. She did not trust him, but for the first time in 7 years, she did not feel entirely alone. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the window panes. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck midnight, and in the darkness of her small room, Elara Goodwood made a silent vow. She would learn the truth, she would clear her father's name, and she would never, ever let a duke or a lady or a whisper of scandal determine her worth again. Part 4. The frost had not yet melted from the garden paths when Elara rose the next morning. She dressed in her plainest gown, a dark blue wool that made her look like a shadow against the pale dawn, and slipped out of the house before the kitchen fires were lit. The garden at Winterbrook House was a formal creation of box hedges and gravel walks, designed to be admired from the terrace, not inhabited. But beyond the manicured borders lay a wilder place, a walled orchard where the groundskeeper's cottage once stood. It was there that Elara went, drawn by a memory she could not shake. The cottage was gone now, replaced by a toolshed and a stack of firewood. But the stone wall remained, and the old rose trellis, and the place where her father had knelt to tie a loose stem, promising to return before supper. She stood before the wall, her breath clouding the air, and pressed her palm against the cold stone. "I am here, Papa," she whispered. "I am still here." A step sounded behind her on the gravel. She turned. The Duke of Ashworth stood at the edge of the orchard, his greatcoat thrown over his shoulders, his boots dark with dew. He looked as though he had not slept. His cravat was tied carelessly, and his hair, usually tamed with pomade, fell in a loose wave over his brow. "I followed you," he said. Elara did not lower her hand. "Why?" "Because I owe you an explanation," the Duke said, "and because I have been a coward long enough." He walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate, as if approaching a wounded animal. When he reached the wall, he stopped and laid his own hand on the stone, a few inches from hers. "This was his place," the Duke said. "He used to stand here every morning, watching the sun rise over the orchard. He said it reminded him of his father's land in Kent." Elara looked at him sharply. His father's land. The Duke nodded. James Mallory was not a common groundskeeper. He was the natural son of a marquis. His mother was a lady's maid. When the marquis died, the legitimate heirs denied the connection and threw his mother out. Your father was raised in service, but he was educated by the marquis's old tutor. He knew Latin and Greek. He could have been a gentleman. Elara's throat tightened. "Why did he never tell us?" "Because he wanted to protect you," the Duke said. "He knew that if his birth became known, it would bring you nothing but trouble, so he buried it. He took a position as an estate manager here, and he kept his secrets close. Until your father accused him of theft." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Yes." Elara turned to face him fully. The cold air burned her cheeks, but she did not shiver. "Why should I believe any of this? You could be lying to protect your family's name." "I am not lying," the Duke said. "I have the documents to prove it. The confession, the account ledger, the letters from your father that my father burned in the attic. I have spent 2 months gathering evidence, trying to understand what happened. And every day I have looked at that portrait and wondered how I could ever make it right." "By telling me the truth," Elara said. "Not pieces of it, all of it." The Duke held her gaze. The gray of his eyes had warmed to the color of rain on slate. "Your father did not steal the heirloom. My father did. He was a gambler and a drunkard, and he sold the silver rose to pay his debts. When your father found out, my father accused him of the theft to silence him. But your father had one weapon, the truth, and he threatened to use it. So my father gave him a choice: leave quietly or face transportation. And my father chose exile. To protect you and your mother," the Duke said. "He believed that if he stayed, my father would have him arrested and your family would be ruined. So he left. He wrote letters every month, but my father intercepted them. He burned them in the attic furnace, along with every record of your father's employment." Elara turned away. Her hand fell from the wall. The cold was nothing compared to the numbness spreading through her chest. "Where is he now?" she asked. "I do not know," the Duke said. "The last letter was dated 6 years ago. It was sent from Portsmouth. He wrote that he had taken work on a merchant ship bound for the West Indies. He planned to return when he had enough money to clear his name." The Duke's voice cracked. "He never returned." The silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Somewhere in the orchard, a bird began to sing, a thin, hopeful sound that seemed to mock the desolation of the moment. Elara closed her eyes. She saw her father's face in the portrait, the kind eyes, the steady brow, the quiet dignity of a man who had been broken but never defeated. She saw her mother's face too, lined with grief and unanswered questions. "I want to see the letters," she said. "You will," the Duke replied. "I have kept them. I will show you everything." She opened her eyes and looked at him. For a moment, the Duke of Ashworth was not a title or a name. He was simply a man, standing in the cold, offering a truth that had cost him his family's honor. "Thank you," she said quietly. The Duke inclined his head. "Do not thank me yet. There is more you need to know, about my father, about the heirloom, about the men who helped him cover it up." Elara frowned. "Men?" "Your father was not the only one who knew the truth," the Duke said. "There were others, servants who were paid to keep silent, a steward who forged documents, a magistrate who accepted a bribe to overlook the evidence." His voice hardened. "I intend to find every one of them, and when I do, I will make them answer for what they did." Before Elara could respond, a voice echoed across the garden. "Your Grace." They both turned. A footman stood at the edge of the orchard, his face flushed with cold and urgency. "Lady Cecilia Vane is here," the footman said. "She arrived an hour ago and demands to speak with you at once." The Duke's expression shuddered. "Tell her I am occupied." "She is already in the drawing room, Your Grace. She refused to leave." The Duke swore under his breath, a word that would have scandalized the footman if he had heard it. Then he turned back to Elara. "Come with me," he said. Elara shook her head. "I will only make it worse." "You will make nothing worse," the Duke said. "You are a witness to the truth, and I will not let her insult you again." He held out his arm. Elara hesitated, then took it. The contact was light, but it sent a current through her, a sense of standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. They walked together through the garden, past the box hedges and the frozen fountain, and into the house through the morning room. Lady Cecilia stood in the center of the drawing room, tapping her foot against the carpet, her mulberry gown swirling around her like a storm cloud. When she saw Elara on the Duke's arm, her face went pale with fury. "What is this?" she demanded. "You bring her into a formal room as if she were a guest." "Miss Goodwood is my guest," the Duke said. His voice was cold as iron. "And you, Lady Cecilia, are not." The widow's mouth fell open. "You cannot be serious." "I am perfectly serious," the Duke said. "You arrived uninvited. You have insulted a woman under my protection, and you have spread rumors that have caused her pain. That is not the behavior of a lady, Lady Cecilia. It is the behavior of a jealous child." Lady Cecilia took a step back, as if she had been struck. Then her face contorted into something ugly. "You are making a fool of yourself, Ashworth," she hissed. "The Tun will never accept her. She is a servant, a maid's daughter, a woman with no family, no fortune, no name." Elara felt the words like a lash, but she did not flinch. She lifted her chin and met Lady Cecilia's gaze. "I have a name," she said quietly. "It is Goodwood, and I have a father. He is a man of honor, more honor than any person who spreads lies in the dark." Lady Cecilia's lips curled. "How touching, a little sermon from the kitchen." The Duke stepped forward, placing himself between the two women. "Enough," he said. "You will leave my house, Lady Cecilia, now." The widow stared at him, her eyes blazing. "You will regret this. I will make certain of it." Then she turned and swept from the room, her skirts hissing against the floor. The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Ilara looked at the Duke. His face was set in lines of cold resolve, but his hands were shaking. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Yes," he said, "I did." He turned to her, and for a moment the mask slipped. Beneath the arrogance and the ice, she saw a man who was terrified, not of Lady Cecilia or the ton, but of the weight of his own conscience. "I have spent 7 years living with my father's crimes," he said. "I will not spend another day letting them shame the people he wronged." Ilara held his gaze. "Then help me find my father, help me bring him home." The Duke's eyes softened. "I will," he said, "I swear it." And in the cold light of the drawing room, with the echo of Lady Cecilia's fury still hanging in the air, a fragile alliance was born, not of trust, but of necessity, and the faint, distant hope that the truth might still be enough to heal what had been broken. Part 5. The storm broke over Winterbrook House just after sunset, a wild autumn gale that rattled the casements and sent the candle flames dancing in their sconces. Ilara sat in the servants' hall, but her mind was not on the mending in her lap. She was thinking of her father's face, and the Duke's promise, and the question that had been gnawing at her since the garden: what would happen when the truth came out? She did not have long to wait. A letter arrived that night, delivered by a boy who had ridden through the storm with a satchel slick with rain. The letter was addressed to the Duke, but the messenger handed it to Ilara by mistake, and she saw the seal before she could stop herself. It was the seal of the Ashworth family, pressed into a wax the color of old blood. She carried it to the Duke's study, her heart pounding. The door was closed, but a line of light showed beneath it. She knocked once. "Enter." The Duke was seated at his desk, a pile of documents before him. His cravat had been discarded, and his shirt was open at the throat. He looked up as she entered, and something in his face shifted, relief, perhaps, or a quiet gladness that she had come. "You have a letter," she said, holding it out. He took it without looking at the seal. "You are shaking." "It is cold," she said, though it was not entirely true. The Duke rose and crossed to the hearth, where a fire burned low. He added another log, then turned to face her. "The storm has worsened," he said. "You should not have come through the corridor alone." "I am not afraid of the dark," Ilara replied. "No," he said quietly, "I did not think you were." He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. She watched his face as he read, the tightening of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, the faint tremor in his hand. "What is it?" she asked. He did not answer at once. He read the letter twice, then set it on the desk and stood very still, as if bracing himself. "It is from my aunt," he said, "the Dowager Duchess. She has heard the rumors. She is coming to Winterbrook tomorrow to restore order and save the family name." His voice was bitter. "She intends to force you out." Ilara felt the floor shift beneath her. "I see." The Duke turned to her, his gray eyes dark with resolve. "She will not succeed. I will not allow it." "You may not have a choice," Ilara said. "A duchess has power I cannot imagine. If she wants me gone, I will have to leave." "Then I will leave with you," the Duke said. The words hung in the air, heavy as thunder. Ilara stared at him. "You cannot mean that." "I mean every word," he said. "I am not my father. I will not sacrifice an innocent person to protect a title that was built on lies." He took a step toward her. "Ilara." It was the first time he had called her by her given name. The sound of it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "I have spent my entire life trying to be worthy of this name," he said, "and I failed. Not because I was not strong enough or clever enough, but because the name itself was tainted. It was bought with your father's exile, with your mother's tears, with the years of your childhood that you lost." His voice cracked. "I cannot undo that, but I can stand beside you now." Ilara's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing to weep. "And what will that mean for you, for your family, for the tenants who depend on Winterbrook?" "It will mean that I am finally doing what is right," the Duke said. "And I will face the consequences." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady, and in that small contact she felt the weight of his conviction. "I will not ask you to stay," he said. "I will not ask you to fight, but if you choose to, I will fight with you." Alara looked down at their joined hands. A duke and a maid's daughter. A man with a broken name and a woman with a vanished father. They were an impossible pair, and yet in that moment, standing in the firelight, it felt like the only true thing in a world built on lies. "I will stay," she said quietly. "Not for you, for my father." The Duke nodded, his expression grave. "Then we will face my aunt together." But the storm had other plans. By midnight, the wind had risen to a howl, and the lights in the house began to fail. Servants rushed to close shutters and bank fires. Alara, unable to sleep, made her way to the kitchen to fetch a candle and found Mrs. Thistle standing at the window, her face pale with worry. "There is a tree down on the north road," the housekeeper said. "The dowager's carriage will not be able to pass tomorrow. She will have to wait in the village." Alara did not feel relief. She felt a cold certainty that this was only a temporary reprieve. The dowager would come, and when she did, she would bring the full force of the ton with her. But Alara also felt something else, a quiet, stubborn hope, because the Duke had said he would fight and she believed him. She believed him. Part 6. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth arrived 3 days later, when the storm had passed and the roads had been cleared. Her carriage was a black behemoth drawn by 4 matched grays, and she descended from it like a queen stepping onto conquered soil. She was a tall woman, broad-shouldered and regal, dressed in widow's black that made her face seem carved from bone. Her eyes were the same gray as the Duke, but colder, harder, with none of the hidden warmth that flickered in her nephew when he looked at Alara. The household assembled in the great hall to receive her. Alara stood at the back among the servants, her hands clasped before her. She wore her best dress, a simple gown of dove-gray wool, and her hair was pinned back with the same severity she had worn for years. But there was a new steel in her spine, a new lift to her chin. The dowager's gaze swept over the gathering and settled on Alara as if drawn by a scent. "So that is the girl," the dowager said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "The maid's daughter who has turned my nephew's head." The Duke stepped forward. "Aunt Georgiana, you are welcome in my house, but you will not insult my guests." The dowager raised a thin, arched brow. "Guests, is that what you call her? I have heard a different word. Several different words, in fact, none of them flattering." "Then you have been listening to gossip," the Duke said, "and gossip is not welcome here." The dowager descended the remaining steps and walked toward Alara, her black skirts rustling like wings. She stopped an arm's length away, her cold gray eyes sweeping over Alara's face and form with an expression of frank contempt. "You are very pretty," the dowager said. "In a common sort of way, I can see why a young man might be tempted, but my nephew is not any young man. He is the Duke of Ashworth. He has a duty to his name, his title, and his family. And you, my dear, are not part of that family." Alara met the dowager's gaze without flinching. "I have never claimed to be your grace. I am a secretary, nothing more." The dowager's lips twitched. A secretary who is seen leaving the Duke's private rooms at midnight. A secretary who has been given